Welcome. I'm Kevin Miller, and this is a podcast for your personal evolution. In this episode, how to better navigate unexpected and undesired change. I experience our culture growing more and more fearful of unexpected and undesired change. If you were to look back on your life, though, and make a list of all the unexpected and undesired changes you've experienced in your life, I bet it's fairly long. Mine is. And I'd ask you to consider, why would you think that many more unexpected and undesired changes aren't ahead of you? But what I see then is that when we've got anxiety about these possible, and I'd say probable changes ahead of us, we're taken away from our ability to have joy and fulfillment today to the fullest. I mean, I find myself looking at two perspectives. One, none of the unexpected and undesired changes in my past have killed me. And in the past year, I've had maybe the most I've ever had. They haven't ruined me. But two, I amaze myself to think about how many of the unexpected and undesired seemingly changes actually turned out to be great gifts to my life. So to unpack the psychology around change and how we perceive it and how we can better navigate it going forward, in this episode, I have Maya Shankar back on the podcast. I first had Maya on for the launch of her podcast, A Slight Change of Plans, which Apple awarded as the best show of the year in 2021, and it has now grown to be a gigantic podcast. Well, after 4 years of her hosting and producing the show, Maya has now culminated her findings and experience in a book called The Other Side of Change: Who We Become When Life Makes Other Plans. Maya says, I've written this book for anyone who is currently in the choppy waters of a change, is trying to make sense of a past change, or is anxious about a future change, which to me says all of us. So Maya, if you don't know her, she's a cognitive scientist and was a senior advisor in the Obama White House, where she founded and served as chair of the White House behavioral science team. She's also served as the first behavioral science advisor to the United Nations. Maya has a postdoctoral fellowship in cognitive neuroscience from Stanford, a Ph.D. in cognitive psychology from Oxford on a Rhodes Scholarship, and a BA from Yale. She's been profiled by The New Yorker. She's been featured guest on NPR's All Things Considered, Freakonomics, and Hidden Brain. All that to say, she knows the psychology behind change, and she's here to help us help ourselves. So coming up next is my discussion with Maya Shankar and how to better navigate unexpected and undesired changes in our lives. Let's evolve ourselves. Maya, you having studied change in and of itself for so many years now, one, and two, having so many people and so many stories like is in the book. I'm enamored with your insights on change and you just bringing it to the forefront, because I think that I haven't conceived of it well. So thank you for the work you've done. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much. And that means a lot. I never planned to write a book. And the only reason that I wrote The Other Side of Change is because I really felt like I had something to say about this topic. And as someone who on a personal level really struggles with change, feels a lot of anxiety around the uncertainty, has felt totally unmoored when it comes to her self-identity in the throes of change, I just wanted to give people a helpful resource that they can use during these times of transition, and can also use when it comes to future changes they're afraid of or past changes that they're eager to renew their relationship with. So I'm so thrilled that it resonated with you. And for someone who I know is going through a big change, like there's no better compliment an author can receive that the message has landed for you.
Yeah, it has. This is a counseling session. Thank you. And
I'll send you the bill after. No, I'm just kidding.
Please do. Already worth it after reviewing the book. You know, as I was looking at it, Maya, and thinking about change and unexpected change,
Mm-hmm.
and as I thought about it, and really as I read the book and looked at some of the stories, I mean, aren't we really talking primarily about undesired change, that at least in the moment, it is not a change we would have chosen or did choose. It's often kind of, quote, happened to us in some sense. And in that moment, it is something that we at least think we don't want. Yes?
That's exactly right. I wanted to focus on those anvil drop from the sky moments in our lives because it puts us into a very different psychological state when a change is happening to us versus a change that we have initiated. And one thing that those unexpected changes in our lives are filled with is a whole bunch of uncertainty. And our brains are not wired to enjoy uncertainty. So, one of my favorite research studies shows that we are more stressed when we're told we have a 50% chance of receiving an electric shock than we are when we're told we have a 100% chance. So, we would rather be certain that we're going to get the shock, that we're going to have a negative bad thing happen to us, than to have to wrestle with any ambiguity. And it sounds like such a wild finding, right? Like, wouldn't we prefer there's a chance we don't get it? But the reality is that we like being in control. We like having a firm grip on the steering wheel. And for many of us, we fall prey to what psychologists call the illusion of control. All this means is that in everyday life, we wildly overestimate the degree to which we are dictating how our lives turn out. And when an unexpected change is thrown our way, when life throws us a negative curveball, or what at least appears on the surface to be a negative curveball, because sometimes we will be surprised by what happens as a result, it shatters that illusion, right? We are forced to reckon with the true limits of our control.
Yes, you're the shock thing. I read that and totally align with it. Yeah, I'd rather, if it's possible, I'm gonna say just shock me. I recently, with some friends, we did a 3-day fast and talked about it afterwards. And I thought, for me to proactively decide I'm not going to eat for 72 hours. I mean, I do fasting pretty frequently anyways, but to do that, I thought, it's okay. I know I can do it. I'm not going to die. I've done it before and it's fine. But now if you put me in lock me in a room and say I can't have food, I'm going to starve. The fact that I get to choose, that I have, as you said,
Exactly.
control, to some degree, is everything.
That's exactly right. We enjoy having agency, right? And actually, what's so interesting about that, and I'm so glad you mentioned it, Kevin, is that even when we initiate a change, so even when we're willing a change, um, that agency can actually fool us into believing that we're going to be able to predict how we'll respond to the change perfectly. Because it's like, well, we invited this change into our lives. We worked so hard for this promotion. We wanted to buy this house. We wanted to enter this relationship. We wanted to become a parent. Whatever it is, we often think, well, if we willed it, then presumably we're going to have a good outcome. And one piece of advice I give to people is to approach the changes in their lives, expected or unexpected, with a profound amount of humility. Because while there are differences in how our brains respond to expected and unexpected change, one thing is true across the board, and that is that we are bad affective forecasters. What does this mean? It means we are terrible at predicting how we will feel and think about future events. And this is very well documented in the literature. We tend to overestimate how good the good stuff's going to be. We tend to overestimate how bad the bad stuff's going to be. And this is particularly relevant during moments of change because in a moment of change, we are being thrust into a totally new landscape and into a new reality with all sorts of new constraints. And we forget that when that happens, we too will change as people. It's not like our circumstances are changing and our environment's changing, but we're staying the same. We're changing all the time. And it's actually very hard to predict what those changes will be, how we will become different. And there's a reason why my book is called The Other Side of Change. It's a nod to the fact that we will become different people on the other side of change. And we might be quite surprised by the new abilities and new perspectives and new values that are unlocked as a result of that change experience. And it may lead us to think differently about the change we've gone through, positive or negative.
I read that and I was going to question you on it. The aspect of we change. We are, that something happens and we change. Do we, Are you citing that we do, period, or we can? Or are you saying, yeah, we do good or bad, or we can?
We change all the time. So one illusion that our brains are susceptible to is called the end of history illusion. It basically says that while we fully acknowledge we've changed considerably in the past, right, over the course of our lifetime to date. So, for example, if you show me pictures of 10-year-old Maya or 20-year-old Maya, I'll be like, oh my God, no relation. This is so cringe. I'm such a different person today. It's hard for me to even relate to that younger version of myself. But interestingly, if you ask me, Kevin, well, how much do you think you'll change in the future? I will say, oh, no, 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 no. I'm done changing. What you see is what you get. This is the finished product. So researchers have established that we can sometimes view the present moment, as Dan Gilbert says, as a watershed moment in which we have become the person we will be for the rest of our lives. But of course, we are always changing as people. Our perspectives are changing, our values are changing, our belief systems are changing, our capabilities are changing. And my argument in the book is that a big change can actually accelerate this internal transformation. And that's what I saw happen in all the people that I interviewed in depth over the course of many years. They were actually surprised by how radically different they had become on the other side. And I think that's because a big change in our lives is one of those pressure tests. It, first of all, reveals parts of ourselves that were previously hidden from view. So it might reveal beliefs that you were holding that were holding you back. It might reveal that maybe your values aren't in the right place. It might reveal new perspectives that you hadn't before considered. And when the current version of you is brought into the light, you can then take deliberate steps to actually shape the version. You can take, sorry, this is edited, right? So I can retake
Yeah.
these. Okay. So when the version of yourself that you might not have been fully acquainted with, right? We like to think we have a full understanding of who we are, but so much of us remains hidden, right? Because we've only seen the parts of ourselves that have emerged as a result of the random set of experiences we've happened to have over the course of our lives, right? That's a limited set of data points. So when we see more of ourselves revealed, we can then shape that future trajectory. And we will absolutely be in dialogue with the change, right? It will lead us to challenge parts of ourselves that we might have held sacred before and to see them anew.
Okay, I want to go right there on the changes that we think that, yeah, if I look back and say, gosh, well, I was Kevin 5 years ago, I would say that, oh my gosh, the things that have changed and evolved. And yet I, I admittedly feel like, okay, but now I'm actually me. But if I go then and say, okay, 5 years later, 5 years from now, I'm going to look at me today and go, oh my goodness gracious. Okay. So if we hold that, here's where I have a question.
Absolutely.
Continually.
You should push back as much as possible. Like, I love these.
Well, no, it's not a pushback. It's an add to. If I do that, if I hold myself lightly where I am now, thinking, gosh, I know, as much as I know now, but I'm going to know so much more. If we look to identity in my research, in the work that I'm doing, I look at our majority of our identity is related to our beliefs, our belief system, my worldview. But if I look and go, where was I 5 years ago? The amount of beliefs that have changed, things that I held to that I do not anymore align with. I feel like I've evolved past some of those, and gosh, then that holds me to today, right here, right now, to look at the things that I believe on, it's the best that I know. And this is what I'm standing on. But if I'm going to look and go, I'm going to change and evolve over here, I got to hold those beliefs lightly. I think I'd be better served to. That's big medicine.
Absolutely. I actually think one of the best insights that comes from the science is that we should learn to hold our belief systems with an open fist rather than a closed fist. And the reason is that most of the beliefs that we generate over the course of our lives are not actually the result of thoughtful, deliberate consideration. A lot of them have been absorbed subconsciously from our environment, from popular culture, from cultural norms that we inherited from our families, from messages that we received from teachers or friends. And we didn't interrogate them at the time to wonder, is there merit to this belief? What do the facts say? What does the evidence say? Is this sort of self-limiting belief holding me back? And is it not actually true? And so I believe that the power that sits in change is to force us to take that moment to step back and reflect on some of the beliefs that we hadn't thought to interrogate for our lives. And it can actually be a very empowering, freeing process. So one of the things I tried to do with the other side of change was to search the world for the most fascinating, kind of like mind-blowing stories of change that would lead to a page-turning experience, because I wanted to give that joy to my readers, but to also have universal lessons that apply to all of us that sit within them. So one woman I found, Ingrid, she had grown up with a lot of shame around her family's Colombian roots and heritage. She was embarrassed of the indigenous practices that she and her family engaged in. And in her 20s, she actually gets into a biking accident and develops amnesia. So she loses many of her memories. And there's something so curious about the way in which her memories come back to her. She's kind of this blank slate for a while. And she remembers first the stories of her family's history. And she's so enamored by those stories without all these biases that she had developed over the course of her childhood. She's like, wow, these stories are beautiful and awe-inspiring, and I can't wait to share them with everyone that I know. And only later, a few weeks later, does the memory that she was once ashamed of those beliefs return. But at that point, it's too late. She has already seen her family's history anew without those anchors and biases and problematic framings with which she had viewed her family's history in the past. And I don't want anyone to get amnesia, but Ingrid's example is a wonderful illustration of how our beliefs are not sacred, immutable truths. When Ingrid examined why it is that she had had this relationship with her family history, she remembered that throughout her childhood, her mom had cautioned her when it came to sharing these stories with others. And it didn't come from a place of shame. Ingrid's mom was very proud of her family's history, but she didn't want Ingrid to be subject to discrimination or, worse yet, violence. But little Ingrid's mind had interpreted that admonition as, oh, well, if I'm being told that I can't talk about something, there's a good chance that there's something bad about that thing. And it was only through this experience with amnesia that she saw, oh, I don't actually have to think that way. She actually says it was akin to Jenga, where she was able to pull out the shame block and have her full other rest of her identity stay intact. And I think all of us should be asking, what are beliefs that I might be carrying from my childhood that are holding me back today, that are preventing me from inspiring the changes that I want in my life, that are preventing me from developing the self-identity I want to carry with me in this world, are needlessly lowering my self-confidence, And it's a great thought experiment for us all to wonder, if I had been born in slightly different circumstances, if I had slightly different conversations with different people, if I had been born into a different family or in a different location, how would my belief system be radically different today? And that reminds us that our beliefs are, in fact, subject to revision.
Well, yes, thanks. And you talking about biases, that is a big focal point, looking at, do I believe X? Do I believe in X? Because I legit have researched it and audited it and chewed it and questioned it. And I really, it's the best I can figure out. It's true. Or is it a belief that I really want to be true because I've attached my identity to it?
Exactly. There's a lot of beliefs that we just hold dear because it's self-serving, but there's not actually good reason. So in the same way, you want to revisit beliefs that you are hurting you in some way, you also don't want to carry beliefs that might be helping you in the short term, but aren't based in reality, right? Or that you're just too afraid to let go of those beliefs. We want to have a more accurate view of reality.
Yeah, those are the fairy tales I tend to look at. Okay, I want to dissect something real quick that the Chinese farmer story. You familiar with that one? Chinese farmer story, he has a horse and it gets away. And all the villagers say, "Oh my gosh, what a bummer." He's like, maybe. And
Bad
then
luck.
it comes,
Yeah.
and then it comes back and it brings a bunch of wild horses. And they're like, "Oh my gosh, what, how great." He's like, maybe. And then the story goes on and this happens and this happens. Okay. I got a question in that though for you for us to play with is one, as I look at that and I look at the unexpected changes that at face value, I go, I did not want that. I do not want that. It's not okay with me. It's bad. Right. So I judge it. So now I'm trying to back up and go, okay, well, maybe let's see. But not but maybe it's an and, Maya. I'm also back to biases. I'm questioning the propensity to try to justify whichever way it goes, whatever it is. I'm going to try to make it kind of back to control and certainty. I'm going to try to make it good so that I can say, well, this happened. I got divorced, lost the family home. These things happen. And now I'm supposed to sit here and go, yeah, but now, like the Chinese farmer, maybe, and I'm going to tell you all the great things that have happened about that, how it's been redeemed. And I'm just sensitive to the propensity to do that as well. Can I kind of hold, of course I want to make the best of things and to redeem things, but can I also hold jointly that I don't know if I'll ever be okay with what happened and try to reconcile it? Can I just maybe never reconcile it, but go forth and be happy also?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's so wonderful you have such a positive orientation. I think not everyone tries to figure out how the change they're going through is, net positive or going to lead to good outcomes. So, I think you should be happy that that's your default instinct, and I think it speaks to the fact that as humans, we are natural born storytellers. So, irrespective of our spiritual beliefs or religious beliefs, we do like making narratives out of our lives. We like cohesion. We like consistency. We like believing that there's some reason that things happen or there's some lesson for us to learn in some way. Because otherwise, just confronting the arbitrariness of the world is very daunting, right? I mean, as someone who's agnostic, as someone who fundamentally doesn't believe there's a cosmic significance to what happens in our lives, I too like looking at the events in my life and thinking, okay, well, is there a silver lining here? Is there something positive that could come out of this? But there is a delicate balance there, which is um, you want to make sure that you're also giving yourself space and time to grieve the life that you once had. Because by definition, change involves loss of some kind. You are moving from an old way of being into a new way of being. And it is very natural for us to feel sadness at the life we had, even if we are open to embracing the current life that we're living. I think that one thing that I've been a little bit allergic to is I would so often hear this mantra, Maya, while you can't control what happens to you, you can control your reaction to what happens. And, you know, it carries a lot of wisdom, but in my hardest moments, like for example, when my husband and I were hearing that there was a second miscarriage with our surrogate and we had lost identical twin girls, it just registers as a platitude. You're like, okay, that sounds nice, but how exactly am I supposed to think and feel differently? It's not like there's a switch in my brain I can flip on and off. And then when I turn it on, I suddenly feel more peaceful or more hopeful or more, like there's more possibilities that lie ahead than I did before. I wanted to understand how to actually feel differently and respond differently to my circumstances. And in many ways, that was my guide in writing The Other Side of Change. I wanted to give people a toolkit, science-based techniques, questions they can ask themselves, thought experiments, really visceral storytelling so that they can truly start to shape a realistic path forward that both accommodates their grief, but then also invites a greater sense of possibility for what can lie ahead.
Okay, I want to play with that quote, Maya, because I pulled that out. Your questioning of, it's not, you can't control what happens, but you can control your reaction. So I apparently seem to be an optimist by nature. And I'm okay with that
Great.
as well.
Yeah.
Well, I think so. But and I'm not sure, but or and because this feels a little pessimistic. If I do look at, what are bad things that could happen? I don't dwell on that, but I have, like we talked about, I have 9 kids. The chances of me experiencing the death of a child are just statistically higher than my friends with 1, 2, 3, or none kids. So I'm sure not sitting around morbidly thinking about the death of a child, but I am thinking about, okay, I do get the chance, I feel like, to control, to influence at least my reaction. Is it going to destroy me?
Mm-hmm.
And am I going to be devastated and not be available for my other kids and not be able to go on with life? Or can I start preparing myself for, call it resilience, call it adaptability? Can I learn about grieving now? Can I look at attachments back, to that now and look at, gosh, what is the loss going to feel like? So I'm playing with that a little bit. Thoughts?
Yes. One thing that I focus on, especially in chapter 2 of the book, is how when a big change happens to us, we can sometimes needlessly constrain ourselves around what is possible for us moving forward. Oftentimes, we need ways to crack open our imagination about who we can become in this newly constrained world that we're about to occupy. And so I talk about this concept of possible selves. So we conjure up possible selves in everyday life as we're just going about our business. There are hoped for selves, which reflect our dreams and aspirations. There are feared selves, which reflect our anxieties and worries. And then there are our expected selves, which are just the versions of us that we think are most likely to happen. And when a big change occurs, a lot of our hoped for selves can disappear from sight. And a lot of our feared selves can start to expand and grow and populate in number. And so I talk about strategies that we can use to actually open ourselves up to more possibilities and to conjure up new ways of being. So one of the stories I talk about in the book involves a guy named Dwayne, who at age 16 was sentenced to 9 years in adult prison for a carjacking he committed. And Dwayne had been such a promising student. He was hoping to study at Georgia Tech. He was a loving and doting son to his mother. He had a great group of friends, but he made this really idiotic mistake in an effort to try to prove his, you know, worth and I'm a strong dude to some of the boys in his neighborhood. Sorry, let me retake that. But he just but this one night he made an idiotic mistake in an effort to prove that he was strong and cool to the guys in his neighborhood. And when Dwayne went behind bars, he was so fearful of who he might become within those walls, right? He was worried, am I going to pick up a gambling habit? Am I going to start stealing from people? Am I going to become violent? Like, what does my future hold? And it was only when he had an experience of what's called moral elevation that his understanding of what his future could look like as a prisoner began to change. Moral elevation is the warm, fuzzy feeling we get in our chests when we witness someone else's outstanding behaviors. It might be their courage or their self-sacrifice or their humility or their resilience or their ability to forgive, you name it, but anything counts. And importantly, moral elevation doesn't simply feel good, it actually changes our brains. It cracks open our imagination about who we can be. Because when we witness someone else violating our assumptions of what humans are capable of, that in turn cracks open our own imagination about who we can become. Dwayne meets this fellow prisoner, Bilal, who defies all of Dwayne's assumptions about what it means to hold the identity of prisoner. He wakes up an hour early before the guards come by for count and does 250 push-ups. He always irons his prison clothes so that they're crisp. He cares for the younger prisoners. He teaches the younger boys how to box so they can protect themselves from the threat of violence. He, as Dwayne says, taught Dwayne how to be lovely. That's the word he uses, which is so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in witnessing Bilal's example that when Dwayne encounters a book of poetry that speaks to the experience of young boys and men of color in prison, that he thinks for the first time, oh, actually, that's not quite accurate. And it's with this newly empowered mindset. Sorry, it's just a long story. I'm trying to get through it as quickly as
Yeah.
possible for your listeners. And so Bilal, Bilal on this fundamental level leads Dwayne to question whether maybe there are more futures available to him, even though he's a prisoner. Maybe he's not destined to become a certain type of person just because he's behind bars. And with this new, more empowered mindset, when he stumbles upon a poem a few weeks later that speaks to the experience of a young boy of color in prison, Dwayne thinks for the first time, maybe I could be a poet. I can't do what Bilal did for the younger prisoners because I'm not strong. I don't feel like I have that physical ability, but I can protect people by dignifying their stories, by writing them on the page for others to hear. And fast forward decades, Dwayne is now a Yale Law School graduate. He's a MacArthur Genius Prize winner. And he has written some of the most stirring poetry I've ever read about the experience of being incarcerated. And it's all thanks to that unique experience of moral elevation, which, by the way, is available to all of us. We can see human moral beauty if we are just willing to be keen observers. And all these other people's examples can increase our own sense of what's possible for us.
Okay. On that concept of possible selves, and you talk about the psychologist who came up with that, and you had the three selves: the hoped for self, the feared self, and the expected self. Looking at that, what came to mind for me back to identity is attachments. What are those things? So if the hope for, I've got a project that I'm coming out with soon. I would really like to see it worthy of a Nobel Prize. Honest to God, I really would. That'd be great. And if we make $1 billion, that'd be great. And yet, what if we don't? What if it does nothing but benefit me and my family as it is? Okay. Same thing with physically. I got to look at this about 1.5 years ago. I had the biggest physical injury of my life as a lifetime athlete. Had a wreck and 7 bones and punctured lung and yada, yada, these things that happen. And I didn't have my physicality. So who's Kevin without the athleticism to look at that? And again, not being pessimistic, but if I look at these variations, to me, what it reveals, you used that word a little bit ago.
Yeah.
Is to me, it's my attachment and my identity. Can I be okay regardless? I don't know what sets you up for change better than that, even though I know that sounds simple, but that's a big deal.
Yeah, no, you've raised several important points. So first of all, I do talk in the book about change as revelation. So when a bad thing happens to us, it can feel like a personal apocalypse, right? Like the world that we knew is no longer available to us. But there's something really interesting about the etymology of the word apocalypse. Apocalypse comes from the Greek word apocalypsis. And apocalypsis actually does mean revelation. And so that etymology is quite instructive. Change can upend us, absolutely, but it can also reveal things to us. In your case, it revealed to you that you might have two strong anchors in certain parts of your self-identity that are pretty precarious, right? And that aren't fully in your control, like your physical condition. And if there's one thing that I've learned from researching this book, it's that it can be very helpful to generate more expansive, robust identities that are more resilient in the face of change. So what do I mean by this? I have learned to anchor my identity not simply to what I do, but to why I do that thing. So as a little kid, I was an aspiring concert violinist. I was studying at Juilliard. My big dreams were coming true. And then a hand injury ended my dreams overnight. And I was told by doctors that I had to give up. And I remember grieving not just the loss of the instrument, but also the loss of myself. I think to your point, Kevin, sometimes we don't realize how much something has come to define us, how much of our self-worth we're deriving from something until we lose the ability to do that thing. And in recent years, I've discovered, oh, well, what was it that I really loved about playing the violin? Well, it turns out human connection was at its core. That was at the core of my love and obsession with it. And so, yes, I might not be able to play the violin, but when I lost the instrument, it didn't mean that I lost what led me to love it in the first place. That part of myself was still very much intact. My love of people and connecting deeply, sorry, I hit the lamp. My love of humans and understanding how our brains work and connecting deeply with other people and building these emotional relationships, that was still very much there. And so then the thought experiment becomes, well, where else can I find ways to express this part of myself now that the violin's no longer on offer?
Yeah.
And it turns out that I naturally have gravitated towards activities and pursuits that are all about human connection, right? In my role as a cognitive scientist, I examine the science of human connection. in writing my book, The Other Side of Change, it was all about these deep, long form interviews. My podcast, A Slight Change of Plans, is all about facilitating deep connections. And so I would ask everyone who's listening to just take a moment and to ask themselves, what is my why? What is the thing that makes me love the things I do? Maybe it is a creative outlet. Maybe it is loving seeing yourself getting better at something. Maybe it's giving back to your community. Maybe it's expressing empathy for other people. Maybe it's caretaking. Whatever it is, don't judge your why. Just see it for what it is. You can then ask yourself, well, if I anchor my identity to that, if I've just become the type of person who loves giving back, who wants to advocate for disadvantaged people, who likes the ability to be creative, you now have so many other options available to you when life makes other plans. You're giving yourself a soft landing and a compass of sorts to help you figure out what your next step might be.
Okay. On that concept, not what I do, but why, which I read in your book, I have been playing with that again with if I take away the attachments, dismantle my identity that has been in the past, connect to those attachments. Who am I? What's left? And when you're talking right now, I'm going to look it up and see if I coin this because I really want to have just coined this. I'm thinking about the meta me, the meta identity. What is the identity that goes past, beyond, supersedes the roles, the things, all those things that, as you talk about in the book, are they're somewhat transitory. They can come and go. They can be taken away. They can. I mean, an accident can happen. Who knows what can happen, and you can lose those. What is left? And I want to tune into something that you had in that second chapter on the possible selves too. You said, this is a quote out of the book. You said, and so when change strikes, it can feel like our future has been determined with certain possible selves now closed off to us. Going back to that certainty and that propensity to something just happened. So today, boom, the accident happened, the diagnosis happened, the relationship fracture, you got fired, whatever it is, it happens. And as you said before, that we are programmed to create a story to understand it, that we want to. Like, I got to create a story right now. And so I'm going to say, okay, my future has just been determined. And how seldom is that the case? And yet
It's 100%.
we're going to have to be, well, like, again, I feel like that's what we get the opportunity into now, right here, right now, is to hear this and prepare for it. Prepare and go, if something happens, I'm going to do that. And don't just throttle back, hold it. Like you said, palm open, in essence, or fist open.
Yeah. And I don't want people to have to wait for something bad to happen before they begin to renew their identity, because the whole point of The Other Side of Change is to help insulate people from the worst parts of change so they can focus instead on the possibility that lies within it, on the amazing ways that they can grow and transform internally. And so that's why I give people what's called a change survival kit. That's why I give people a change survival kit at the end of the book. I want them to have all these resources, all these different ways and techniques they can use to broaden their identity, to think differently about their identity. I talk about what's called a self-affirmation exercise, which helped me in one of my darkest moments to have a more well-rounded, robust sense of self when I needed it most. And so, yeah, I think you're exactly right. Like, you want to get ahead of this stuff so that you've built a psychological habit of mind that will help empower you in that moment.
Okay, play with this with me on that topic right there. Resilience has gotten to be such a popular term and great, well deserved. And I've been questioning a lot lately adaptability.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at what we're talking about. If I can conceive of these concepts and be open to change when it comes, because it will, and look at being adaptable instead of being, this is Kevin's paraphrasing, knocked down, so that I can then practice my resilience and come back up. I'd kind of rather be adaptable so I don't fall down and don't need resilience. Now, I'm defining my own terms around adaptability and resilience, but how does that track?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I'm as skeptical as anyone. And when I hear too much about post-traumatic growth or resilience, my spidey sense goes up and I'm like, really? I would say there's two things that I'm allergic to: soy and platitudes or cliches, because, I want to make sure there's a strong, robust evidence base. Look, it's almost not a question of how we define these terms individually. Adaptation, resilience, they can have overlapping concepts. They can also be distinct depending on what your vantage point is. I think the big argument here, though, is that as humans, we are designed to adapt to new circumstances. It's just that you don't need to adapt and simply be resigned to your new circumstances. The argument that I'm making on the other side of change is that if you know the right questions to ask, you can actually become a better version of yourself on the other side. I was so surprised to learn from all the people that I interviewed for this book that by and large, while people were not happy that their specific change happened to them, why would they be? Who would ever invite loss or illness into their lives willingly? They were all deeply grateful for the person they became as a result of the change they navigated. And like I said, I was sort of skeptical, like, really? Is that even possible? But I actually saw that same transformation happen within me unexpectedly. So the last chapter of the book is memoir. And I talk about all the heartbreaks and challenges and obstacles and disappointments that I've navigated in my journey to start a family with my husband and how we haven't been successful. And I did not expect there to be a silver lining. You know, when I was told this isn't working. Okay, what was there, is not there. Sorry, that's a little too coarse. When I was told, this is not working, or there's been a miscarriage, or sorry, we don't understand what's happening. None of that made me feel like things were going to be good on the other side. If you had asked me on the night of the second miscarriage, Maya, is there anything redemptive in this? I would have said no. Are you going to become a better person as a result of this? I would have said no. And yet here I am years later with having endured this slight change of plans and still not having a family and feeling more whole and happy and free than I ever have in my life. And that was so wildly unexpected for me, Kevin, because I just never thought that I was capable of that internal transformation. I think when we look at other people's stories, at least for me anyway, I see them and I just am filled with awe. And I'm like, okay, maybe that was possible for you, but I personally would only end up worse off if this happened to me or if a bad thing happened to me. So seeing a positive transformation within myself where I'm now on the other side with a totally different perspective of the world, new values, new resilient strategies. I believe in it too now. And I credit the incredible people I interviewed for my book for giving me their wisdom and insight to help facilitate this transformation.
I want to ask you, Maya, that, with your miscarriages, which I'm so sorry,
Thank you.
for you to endure that
Oh, and
how is it?
sorry, do you mind just clarifying? So I never want people to think I personally went through the miscarriages. So we did use a surrogate. And so the experience of miscarriage is obviously very different. Maybe you can just say like the pregnancy losses, you and
Sure.
your, yes,
Okay.
I never want to overstate my pain. Yeah.
No, fair. Got it. Okay, so let me ask you, Maya, with this image that you had of a family
Hmm.
and then that not happening, which I'm sorry for
Thank
that
you.
loss and that feeling that I can only imagine but haven't experienced. But with that, how has it changed your view on hope and expectation
Mm.
as you look forward? Yeah, just tell me that.
Yeah. I mean, becoming a mom was the earliest identity that I ever anchored myself to. I mean, from the time I was 3 or 4, I was with my little kid kitchen playset having calls with my fictitious neighbors about my rambunctious kids. And I just always assumed, of course, I'm going to have a family. And you don't predict, right? The barriers that life will throw in your way. What this change forced me to do, and part of the evolution that I'm undergoing right now, is questioning one element of all this, which is why is it that I was led to believe that the only way to live a full and satisfying life as a woman in the society is to become a mom? Like there was something about the cultural influences that I grew up as an Indian American, from what pop culture told me, from role models that I saw in society. It just entered my subconscious that unless I become a parent, my life is a failure of sorts and I will never be able to experience the same richness as everyone else, you know? And even to this day, people tell me, oh, you'll never know like true love. And look, maybe that's true. But what I have learned and what I have re-examined is that I now feel for the first time like I can absolutely live a full and colorful and beautiful life that brims with love, even if I don't become a parent. And that is a psychological state that I didn't expect because you asked me about expectations, given my starting point.
Yeah.
Every time I would imagine my life without kids in the past, my future returned to grayscale. And I had to question these assumptions similar to Ingrid, right? You have to ask yourself, why am I tethering so much of my self-worth to becoming a mom? It's fine to want to become a mom for emotional reasons, but to put all your self-worth in that dream, don't you matter in your own right? You know, I was having to ask myself all these questions. And part of that is because there's a huge stigma that surrounds child-free women in this society, you know, and that was another thing that I had to confront and kind of combat. And so I don't know what the future holds, Kevin. I mean, we still have embryos on ice. We have talked about adoption. Maybe those things will happen for us. But for the first time ever, I'm contemplating a life in which we don't have kids and where I still feel fully intact, which was quite revelatory for me because, again, I just never thought I would get to this point.
Thank you for sharing that. It's been, I resonate with some of the concepts there because as a guy with the big family and the 9 kids, and 2 of those are adopted as well, I have friends, some of my closest friends who are a couple with no kids and have become really close friends with a lady who has never married and no kids. And to me, it feels stark now that having kids is an experience.
Mhm.
They are having experiences that I'll never have. I don't have the space for, I don't have the mindset for. I spent all these years with the kids and they did things that I revere. And so I just have a heart for that aspect too of, yeah, how we have these stereotypes and I don't align with them. I got a question for you though.
Yeah.
On this aspect of change, it's a curiosity to me that as we just got, we're going to have, most people know Michael Easter, The Comfort Crisis. He's got a new book and he's going to be on the show, but I was kind of revisiting The Comfort Crisis. And of course, as he shows, the crisis of our comfort, of our security, of our certainty, as you said. And yet the movies we watch, you know, as we're recording this, we're getting close to Christmas. So watching the Christmas movie. So I was thinking about this today before our show here, Maya, and
Mhm.
thinking, the Christmas movies that we love, most of them, as well as just the movies in general, are generally people who are going along and what happens? Change. Not just unexpected, but undesired change. Why do we enamor ourselves and attract ourselves to watching this? And yet we don't come back and look at our own story. And to that degree, if I'm looking at these great stories that I'm paying to watch, I'd almost think, well, gosh, I hope change happens to me. How terrible. What a boring ass story if nothing happens and it's just me here in my cozy little life forever. We don't watch that show. How do we not put these together?
I mean, it's such a fascinating philosophical question, right? On the one hand, we're terrified of change. On the other hand, we do want change, but on our own terms. And I think this harkens back to this notion of control, right? We want to invite change that feels like it'll make our lives better or interesting or, you know, will liven things up a bit if we're stuck in a rut. But I think the tension exists with, well, I still want to have the reins, right? I still want to be able to dictate not only how this change unfolds, but how it even affects me on a psychological level. And so that is like the ultimate human conundrum, right? Um, like you said, change is just an inherent feature in our lives. So it's happening to all of us all the time. And what would our lives look like if that change was not happening, right? Both externally and then internally, as we've spoken about in this conversation. And my goal is just to make people a bit more comfy with the whole concept so that they can start to see the hardest moments in their lives, not simply as something to just endure, but as an opportunity to reimagine who they can be, right? On the heels of your divorce, there were parts of yourself that maybe you hadn't explored that for the first time you might be able to unlock. There was potential within yourself that you might be able to explore. And I want people to feel like they can do that, that they have license to do that as they're navigating to the other side of change.
Gosh, Maya. Okay. I mean, because you're talking, even the stories you have in the book are usually, somebody's going along and boom, the change happens they didn't want to. And yet we talk about the growth, post-traumatic growth, if you want to, but the opportunity, the strength. Of course, Michael Easter is saying you need to go out there and discomfort yourself if you want to
Yeah.
be well. And to that point, though, yeah, if I look at my divorce, do I go back and justify that now or wish that happened? Not really. There are aspects that I see now of me that needed to be disrupted. Now, I don't know if that was the best way to disrupt them, but it does have me looking now and thinking, what are other areas of me that I don't need to wait for some tragedy to happen, but what are some things in me? I'd like to find those, and can I just
Yeah.
disrupt them now
Yeah.
without the tragedy?
Yes, and you can. And that's the whole point, right, of the book I've written, which is, again, I don't want tragedy to have to strike for people to learn the lessons that I've had to learn the hard way, or that the people I interviewed have had to learn the hard way. You can actually build this strong toolkit right now, even if you're not going through anything. And it can give you the kind of resilience you'll need when life inevitably does throw other plans your way, because that, again, is just a feature of living on planet Earth, whether we like it or not, whether I like it or not.
Well, I'm going to do a shameless plug for the book and possibly a pitch for us to do a part 2, because we could do another show, I think, just on denial, on the
Oh, yeah.
aspect of change. And you write about it in chapter 1 in the
Yeah.
story there of the girl. And
Spoiler alert, denial can actually be healthy.
well,
We're going to tease it.
I think it's about another show, because it was such a primary part of my journey through transition
Oh,
was
interesting.
different aspects of denial. But we may just hold on to that for a part 2, or I can tell folks, look, go get the book in chapter 1, just the writing on denial itself. There was multiple issues in there that you addressed that were, worth the price of admission, as they would say. That was one of them, just talking
Mhm.
about denial. So maybe we'll come back, do a part 2 when the paperback comes out or something, and talk about denial. I'm just grateful for you bringing this topic forward and helping us think through it and see it differently, because yeah, I know I have not looked at it with as much health and productivity as you're helping me look at it. So Maya, thank you for getting this book out. Thank you for the time today and letting me be a student.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Kevin. This was such an enriching conversation. And again, it means so much to me that the other side of change resonated with you. And I honestly hope that people enjoy reading it as much as I enjoyed writing it, because while it was the hardest intellectual challenge of my life to do justice to the people I interviewed and to do justice to the science, I felt so transformed by the experience. And I really hope the reader has a similar one.
I did. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Kevin.
Well, thanks so much for joining us in the discussion. That again is Maya Shankar. That's Shankar. Just type that in anywhere. You'll find her social media. You'll find her all over the place. Wherever you're listening to this now, you can find her podcast, A Slight Change of Plans. And it's from the past 4+ years of producing and hosting the show that she wrote this new book called The Other Side of Change: Who We Become When Life Makes Other Plans. Till next time, here's to the evolving you and me.
Yeah.